The concept of a Godroll is something every Destiny player is familiar with. From the overflow explosive payload Nightwatch you get from your first day in the Cosmodrome, to the brand new crafted reconstruction Vorpal weapon Nessa's Ablation from the Root of Nightmares raid, as D2 players we are barraged by perks, barrels, mags, masterworks, and origin traits every time we boot up the game. And while Godrolls are often a personal subjective thing, this video's goal is filtering the concept through the perspective of an endgame player. Destiny is a series often lauded for its unique, satisfying gunplay. Since you can get away with any loadout in 90% of content, the best weapons to use in most of Destiny are what feel and sound good to you. This video is for those looking to succeed in the 10% of content that remains, where what you use does matter. Low mans, speedruns, and contest or low power content like day ones, GMs, solo lost sectors, and master raids. Since the addition of craftable weapons in the Witch Queen DLC, players now have the option to pick exactly what they want on a majority of the best weapons out today, so there's no reason to settle for anything but the best. While a lot of videos attempt to tell you what is good at the moment, this video's goal is helping players of all skill levels understand what an endgame weapon Godroll looks like, so in the future, you'll be able to use these skills to decide for yourself. A lot of the challenge in Destiny comes from not just playing your cards right in the midst of combat, but understanding what is needed of you in an activity and correctly adapting your loadout to the task at hand. Whether you're cleaning your vault or picking perks for your first crafted heritage, you're sure to find something useful in this guide. The easiest way to understand why certain weapons are so strong in endgame content is through a 3-step approach. In order for a weapon to truly shine in endgame content, 3 requirements must be met: the right situation, the right weapon, and the right role. Too often, players focus only on the third factor, spending time thinking about what perk combination will work best on a weapon, when the other 2 factors hold equal if not greater importance in deciding how effective a weapon will be in endgame content. After all, a 5 out of 5 of a mediocre weapon used in the wrong context might be a Godroll when analyzed individually, but isn't particularly useful or efficient in the grand scheme of things, which is why Godrolls are so treasured in the first place. They do their jobs well. After breaking down these 3 factors, I'll spend some time explaining the role crafting plays and going over real examples of Season 20 endgame Godrolls, and then I'll leave you with some resources you can use in the future to help you make role decisions for yourself. Let's start by talking about applications. While there's a huge selection of weapons in Destiny, the activities present in the game typically limit your weapons to a select pool of functions. When learning why a weapon is an endgame Godroll, it is useful to think about why said weapon is used in endgame content, and becoming familiar with these functions is the first step of that process. Ad clear. First up is the most common use case for any weapon, ad clear. No matter what you do in Destiny, ads are going to be there. Dregs, goblins, scions, you name it. The best ad clear weapons are easy to use, cover large areas, and have a good ammo economy. Major burst. Some enemies, like champions and majors, are chunkier than red bars, and typically ad clear weapons do low damage over a large area, making them less appropriate for fewer, higher health targets. These are the types of enemies you can kill while breezing past them, but they still take some contribution from several players to kill quickly. Boss damage. Finally, some enemies have such big health pools that even more investment and resources are worth expending to make killing them quickly easy. Boss DPS has always been something that Bungie has changed every DLC, so this category can contain a vast array of options depending on when you're looking. Champion stuns. While in some champion content, stun mechanics can be ignored, in low power content it can be inconvenient to work through the damage resistance of an unstunned unstoppable or the burst requirement of instantly killing a pre-stun barrier. In these instances, it can be worth having weapons dedicated to stunning champions more effectively. Keep in mind that a weapon specialized in stunning a champion is not necessarily the best weapon for killing said champion. These are 2 distinct roles. Since champion stun mods change from season to season, some of the available stun weapons may go in and out of fashion, with an emphasis on legendary primaries. Utility. Utility is the broadest category, covering a variety of uses, but as a whole, this role is designed to improve the player's experience outside of pure lethality. This might include crowd control, movement, ammo economy manipulation, ammo acquisition, ability regeneration, simulated reloads, stat buffs, or other special circumstances. Let's talk about weapons next. Now that we understand what kind of jobs our weapons are expected to perform, there are a number of factors that go into figuring out what specific weapons are worth farming and rolling for each of these functions. Type. Arguably the most important factor when deciding on weapons, weapon type dictates almost everything about what a weapon does. A glaive shields the user, a rocket creates a pack hunter fueled explosion, and a linear is almost explicitly single target precision damage. Naturally, a machine gun isn't designed for boss damage, and a linear isn't designed for ad clear. Archetype. In Destiny, damage is typically balanced against range when talking about archetypes. This means that faster firing frames are typically lower range but tend to have higher damage. Since range is usually a non-issue in PvE instances, as we'll discuss later, higher damage, lower range options are generally preferred over the opposite. SMGs are a good example of this, where lightweight and aggressive SMGs are preferred over precisions. Slot. The slot a weapon resides in determines its competition with other rolled weapons as well as exotics. Say you want to determine whether a shotgun is worth using in endgame PvE. One of the things you have to consider is whether it is better than its alternatives in the same slot, as well as whether you can use it with another weapon that may be more important, like Divinity, Witherhoard, or Izanagi's Burden. This is a big reason why kinetic slot blinding jails are often preferred, because they allow players to choose high-impact energy weapons that they wouldn't be able to use with an energy slot option like Truth Teller or Empty Vessel. Energy. A weapon's affinity, stasis, kinetic, solar, etc. can also have some small impacts on whether or not it is chosen. As of Season 20, those primarily correspond to three things: power surge matching, Verity's Brow stacks, and the kinetic unshielded bonus. For surges, an example would be arc weapons being preferred over void or solar when damaging a boss with Hothead, so the arc weapon surge mod does double duty. For verities, usually solar weapons are preferred, since the exotic is typically most effective on Touch of Flame Dawnblade. Finally, kinetic special weapons, which this is most relevant for, have a 15% damage bonus against unshielded targets, leaving strand and stasis weapons in the same slot at an inherent disadvantage. While it is unknown whether this will be patched or not, this does play into the selection of kinetic slot DPS weapons, as 15% is a relatively significant damage difference. Crafting. Added with the Witch Queen DLC, crafting is another aspect to take into consideration thanks to enhanced perks. Thankfully, crafting also allows players to choose exactly which barrel, mag, perks, and masterwork they want on a weapon, which eliminates the RNG of having to farm a weapon over and over to get your desired roll. While enhanced perks themselves are typically slightly better versions of normal perks, oftentimes endgame players will opt for a crafted weapon strictly because it has the enhanced version of perks on a similar competing weapon which does not have a craftable variant. For example, one might opt for a craftable weapon with something like Enhanced Surrounded or Lead from Gold, instead of a weapon that isn't craftable and only gets the normal version of these perks. Perks. The final factor that matters when choosing a weapon to roll is whether said weapon actually has perks worth pursuing. This puts the cart before the horse a little, but perk selection is an unavoidable consideration when talking about endgame weapons. At the end of the day, Bungie might release a craftable weapon that is of a favorable type, archetype, in a slot with little competition, but if it has awful perks, then it might not qualify as viable for endgame content. As the last part of the 3-step process, let's talk about rolls. Now that we've decided on what weapons are the best for each endgame scenario, we need to figure out what we want on said weapons. Perks. This is a complex topic worth its own video, but I'll briefly go over the fundamental requirements that make a perk endgame worthy here. Damage. In endgame content, you don't typically get kills as easily or as often as you would in low-level content. This means that perks like Rampage become much less viable, since they offer higher damage buffs at the cost of low uptime and kills, while perks like Frenzy and Explosive Payload provide flat, lower damage buffs that are either always active or passively activated. For boss damage, the deal is the same. Perks that will be active for the whole damage phase with no kill requirements are vastly preferred over others. Another thing that is important in endgame content is the responsiveness and availability of your weapons. When you need to swap to your champ stun option, for example, you want it to be ready fast and loaded in time for the next engagement. This means handling and reload perks, preferably those that do not require kills, are also essential choices for endgame Godrolls. In a way, these perks also increase your damage over time by making it so that your guns recover from reloads and stowing faster, meaning you can get to shooting more quickly. Perks like Rapid Hit, Field Prep, Archer's Tempo, Autoloading Holster, and the Double Duty Frenzy are great examples of good uptime perks. Utility. Finally, some perks can provide unique benefits that vary from marginally useful to game-changing in endgame content. Perks like Explosive Payload can change a 3-tap overload stun to a 2-tap. Perks like Shoot to Loot can create new damage rotations and reach inaccessible ammo without venturing into dangerous areas. Perks like Adaptive Munitions can lower the stun time of an anti-barrier primary by 3 times. These are all good examples of utility perks. Another important part of analyzing rolls is stats. Stats are pretty straightforward on weapon rolls, especially if we're talking about endgame PvE rather than PvP. Stats are really hit or miss in PvE, so I'll lump them into two categories, useful and useless. These categories apply to barrels, mags, batteries, launch options, masterworks, column perks, and anything else that might affect a weapon's stats. Useful. The useful weapon stats are the ones that boost uptime in the same way uptime perks do. These stats include reload and handling, along with charge time and draw time on fusions and bows. As such, fluted barrel is preferred on nearly every PvE weapon it rolls on, with arrowhead break being a good second choice on weapons with awful recoil direction. In the same vein, flared magwell tends to be the best mag option since it boosts reload the most. Obviously, in cases where a stat like reload is bypassed through autoloading holster, reconstruction, or something similar, then it might be a better idea to use a mag perk that boosts mag size. For weapons with non-standard barrel and mag options like bows, rockets, fusions, and GLs, the same concepts apply. Quick launch, elastic string, compact arrow shaft, and accelerated coils are generally the preferred options for their respective weapons. There are of course exceptions like the cataclysmic Godroll using enhanced battery to maximize 4 times the charm activations through a 6-shot mag, but generally prioritizing these stats is the way to go. Useless. Stats like range, stability, and velocity are typically useless in PvE. The vast majority of PvE engagements exist within the drop-off range of the weapon in question, as distancing from PvE enemies is far less of a priority than PvP enemies, with the environment favoring the player much more, along with team buffs like Lunafaction Rifts or Wells available. Stability is much the same. While it can help with controlling a particularly recoil-prone weapon, especially on controller, it is much less of a priority than reload or handling in every PvE instance. Origin traits. Origin traits are a relatively new addition to the game, but they've proven to be nice little bonuses that can make weapons a little more useful, kind of like an extra perk. While most of them are generally low impact, some of them like Soul Drinker from Vow the Disciple can make a weapon noticeably better than others in the same archetype. Since origin traits aren't random, it is up to you to decide what the best traits are for endgame play when a weapon has multiple options. Rest assured though, at least so far, origin traits have never been make or break for any weapon, and you can change them whenever you want. Let's take everything that we've learned about weapon rolls and apply it to today's meta. As of Season 20, the best weapons for each endgame application in Destiny 2 have largely settled, so now is a better time than ever to use this new knowledge to understand why certain weapons are the best in Season of Defiance. In order to paint a complete picture, we'll also incorporate fixed role options, like exotics and ritual weapons, into each endgame situation discussed here. Even though Arbalest isn't really a god roll by definition, understanding how it competes and interacts with random roll weapons in its champion stun function is essential to understanding why a weapon might not be a god roll when compared against the entire arsenal of weapons in Destiny 2. For each and every category of weapons mentioned here, I'll also provide what I think is the best specific role of an exemplary weapon in that category. Let's start with Ad Clear. Waveframe Grenade Launchers. As of Lightfall, waveframes are easily the most cost-efficient ad clear option in the game. Instantly killing anything but the toughest red bars at Grandmaster difficulty, waveframes are capable of shredding through multiple enemies at such a low cost that they might as well be primary weapons. Boasting nearly 25 shots, waveframes are the obvious ad clear choice compared to other special options, which are typically single target weapons with 15 to 20 ammo. While all waveframes are very good at what they do, it comes as no surprise that I'm going to choose Forbearance as the strongest waveframe. With access to chain reaction along with the Soul Drinker origin trait, Forbearance is an incredibly powerful ad clear tool that is yet to be outclassed over a year after its release. Specifically, quick launch for handling, high velocity rounds for reload, ambitious assassin or unrelenting for lethality or survivability, chain reaction for splash, and a reload masterwork are the go-to for endgame content. SMGs and trace rifles. In a pinch, SMGs and trace rifles can be used to clear ads when you want a weapon that can shoot objectives or prioritize hit count over raw damage. While a waveframe is typically the go-to for ad clear, sometimes an SMG or trace rifle is good enough to finish off a straggler if your other weapons or abilities can handle the bulk of the other enemies, leaving you able to shoot things like buttons and projectiles more easily. A lot of weapons fit this role pretty well, but trace rifles are generally more dominant than SMGs for ad clear purposes in almost every scenario. That being said, traces themselves are relatively equal in most regards, and are usually chosen for specific perks in specific activities. With Fluted Barrel for handling, Light Battery for handling and reload, and a Reload Masterwork being obvious picks, what specific perks and activity calls for will change the trace rifle that is the best option. Retrace Path with Adaptive Munitions and Demolitionists, Path of Least Resistance with Shoot to Loot and Volt Shot, Hollow Denial with lead from gold and repulsor brace, and Acacia's Dejection with reconstruction or field prep and frenzy are all useful in their own right. Machine guns. Machine guns have always been a good option for clearing longer range red bar enemies with ease, and the recent buffs they received in Nightfall have made them even more suited to the task. Boasting heavy reserves and ease of use, in scenarios where you don't need to do boss DPS and your power weapon isn't taken up by something more important, an LMG is a great choice for mowing through adds that something like a waveframe can't reach. Most machine guns will do a good job of ad clear, but Commemoration is generally accepted as the best PvE option at the moment. Boasting a solid archetype and access to two of the best machine gun perks in the game, it's a no-brainer why the Deepstone Crypt LMG is at the top of the endgame charts. For this weapon, the 5 out of 5 has to be Arrowhead Break to bring recoil direction up to 100, extended or appended mag given reconstruction, reconstruction for overflow and auto-loading, killing tally for a consistent damage perk appropriate for adds, and a handling masterwork. Finally, rocket launchers. Gjallarhorn's Destiny 2 debut turned rocket launchers from a mostly boss-centered power weapon into one that can handle pretty much anything. With the power of Wolfpack rounds, rockets now have essentially 300 blast radius, clearing entire rooms of GM tier enemies at the cost of power ammo. While rockets are the most expensive option on this list when it comes to ammo, they're a worthy choice in activities like GMs due to their versatility, as long as the purple bricks keep flowing. Thanks to surges, formerly burns, in activities like GMs, it's worth keeping one rocket of each type around, since your power weapon makes up the bulk of your damage to high health targets like bosses where it counts. That said, the Hothead is clearly the best rocket in Destiny 2 and has been for over a year now. With the best frame for damage adaptive, good handling, and all of the best rocket perks like auto-loading holster for swaps, field prep for reserves and reload, demolitionist for grenade rotations, clown cartridge for raw rocket damage, lasting impression for an orbless flat damage perk, and explosive light for huge blast radius and the highest consistent rocket damage perk, it is simply unmatched. For hybrid ad clear in activities like GMs, quick launch, impact casing, handling, and really any combination of the above perks except lasting impression will do the trick. Fixed rules. Trinity Ghoul, Osteostrega, Witherhorde, Agerceptor, and Gjallarhorn are all exotic options that compete within their respective slots as strong ad clear contenders. A special mention also goes to Salvager's Salvo, which is perhaps the only lightweight frame special grenade launcher worth using for ad clear thanks to chain reaction. Let's talk about Major Burst next. Shotguns. Shotguns have been a staple burst option for dealing with tankier enemies since the first years of Destiny. What they lack in range, they make up for in raw damage, with the highest damage per shot of any special weapon type. While shotguns in the kinetic and energy slot are often viewed separately, the philosophy of picking the best shotgun applies the same way to both. Out of every shotgun in the game, Heritage is probably the one that fits the bill of Major Burst the best. The combination of reconstruction and recombination is just perfect for the task of quickly dealing with a medium health target, without the pains of reloading or a kill reload damage perk. Fluted Barrel for handling, Assault Mag for fire rate increase, reconstruction and recombination for the mentioned reasons, and a handling masterwork make up the classic Heritage 5 out of 5 role. Fusion Rifles. Fusion rifles, while dealing significantly less damage than shotguns, are still useful for bursting down majors and mini-bosses in some scenarios. With no precision requirement and slightly more range, fusion rifles can be decent choices if the situation calls for it, at the cost of some charge time. These weapons tend to play a very minimal role in endgame content, but when they do show up, it's pretty clear what they're designed for. Since we're prioritizing damage in quick bursts, a rapid-fire frame fusion like Cartesian Coordinate is generally preferred, with accelerated coils and a charge time masterwork making that damage output come through even faster. For Cartesian specifically, the Hitmark IS sight boosts handling the most, and Lead from Gold plus Vorpal Weapon are the only two perks in either column that really make sense for PvE. Thankfully, both perks are fantastic. Rocket launchers. It's no surprise that rockets are on this list. They can easily annihilate anything that's not a boss, and they're easy enough to use with Gjallarhorn on deck. As long as you have the ammo to spare, rockets are a great choice for quickly eliminating champions and other tanky enemies. Another mention of rockets means another mention of the Hothead. With rockets, since they are almost always being used for boss damage in conjunction with ad clear and major burst, quick launch, impact casing, and a handling masterwork are always welcome once again. The perks don't change here at all either, with any of the perks mentioned during the ad clear category being appropriate for major burst as well. Linear fusion rifles. LFRs, while not as versatile as rockets, are useful for high impact, long distance shots on a single target. Paired with Divinity, their strict precision requirement is easy enough to meet, and their ammo economy is certainly the best among the high damage power weapons. However, given their recent nerf and their inability to handle anything but single targets, they are not as appealing as rockets in nearly all scenarios at this time. When it comes to linears, there's no contest. Cataclysmic is the quintessential linear. With the best ammo return perk in the game in 4 times the charm, as well as a massive damage perk with 0 kill cost in bait and switch, it's no surprise that Cataclysmic has gained favor in the loadouts of many endgame players. While linears are generally not preferred in today's meta, when you do want one, you're gonna want a Cataclysmic with Fluted Barrel to boost handling, Enhanced Battery to boost the Magdus 6 for FTTC procs, the 2 perks mentioned prior, and a Charge Time Masterwork. Swords. Having fallen from grace since the days of Falling Guillotine, one might wonder what use swords have in dealing with tankier enemies. And it would be correct to think this way, swords are not typically ideal when enemy slaying is the focus. However, sometimes certain builds like Stronghold or environments like speedrunning call for the use of a sword first and foremost, and as such, a heavy attack from a sword becomes an obvious choice to make when a major is nearby. These days, swords are primarily used for movement in endgame content, so what you choose to put on your sword will likely be centered around that rather than on doing damage. That being said, the other half does have damage perks, and Eager Edge is the only relevant perk required for movement on said sword. As such, most people choose to take Enduring Blade for skating ammo, Swordmaster's Guard for higher charge rate given the physics damage change, Eager Edge for movement, and Frenzy for a consistent damage perk greater than Vorpal. Fixed rules. The only notable ritual weapon used for Major Burst is Null Composure, as a rapid-fire fusion with access to Reservoir Burst. On the other hand, there are a fair number of Major Burst exotics, with options like Izanagi's Burden, the Fourth Horseman, Parasite, Gjallarhorn, Xenophage, and the Lament. Let's talk about boss damage next. Shotguns. The days of double slug quick swapping have long since passed, but using shotguns for boss damage is still a viable strategy in tandem with other weapons in today's meta. Double Slug Rocket, Izzy Slug Rocket, and Double Slug or Pellet with Tractor are all viable damage rotations in certain scenarios. The Heritage role mentioned in the previous section is obviously great for doing boss damage, but since I mentioned Izzy Slug, let's provide an example of a boss damage slug in the energy slot, something you can use with Izanagi's Burden. As a function of the Hothead being the best boss damage rocket in the game, spoiler but not really, first in last out is also preferred over Nessus Ablation to make better use of arc weapon surge mods. The Philo Godroll is similar to Heritage, fluted, assault, handling masterwork, but with auto-loading holster and Vorpal weapon instead. Grenade launchers, sniper rifles, fusion rifles. Special grenade launchers, sniper rifles, and fusion rifles are extremely limited in their use in today's damage meta, only appearing to augment damage rotations where the heavy hitters are other weapons like a rocket or Izanagi's Burden. Regardless, the roll on these weapons can still make a difference, so they were given their own section here. Out of these 3 boss damage augment options, the only standout is Wilderflame, thanks to its unique double fire frame recently introduced through the Spire of the Watcher dungeon. Since Vorpal weapon doesn't apply its damage boost after a weapon is stowed, the Godroll Wilderflame for damage rotations is Quick Launch for handling, Spike Grenades for damage, Autoloading Holster to avoid reloads, Frenzy for damage and handling, and a Handling Masterwork. Rocket Launchers. As of Season 20, rocket launchers reign supreme as the best boss damage dealers in Destiny 2. Whether you are doing Clown Rocket, Grenade Rocket, Izzy Rocket, Double Slug Rocket, or Grapple Rocket, rockets with Pack Hunter are generally the best way to go for most bosses in the game. And yeah, it's the Hothead again. This time, Lasting Impression is acceptable since it's a 20% damage increase with 0 requirements besides the late detonation. Linear Fusion Rifles. While linears have fallen off from where they were in Year 5, they are still good DPS options in some circumstances, like on Achelos and Oryx. In Year 6, rockets are certainly the best choice for most endgame damage scenarios, but on bosses where precision damage is preferred or rockets do not have the reserves to keep up, linears aren't a bad backup plan. Since we already mentioned Cataclysmic, let's actually mention another linear fusion rifle, one that is explicitly specialized for specific DPS scenarios. While the 35% damage boost given by Bait and Switch is one of the best boss damage perks in the game, Briar's Contempt from Root of Nightmares has an ace up its sleeve that gives it an edge over Cataclysmic. Not only is Briar's an aggressive linear, giving it a slight damage edge over Cataclysmic, but it also has access to Enhanced Surrounded, a 42% damage buff with no kill or swap requirement. While most bosses do not have consistent close quarters enemies to make running Surrounded Briars worth it, with some bosses like Achelos and Oryx, the circumstances are just right. Surrounded itself is such a big damage buff that it actually counteracts the 15% Lightfall linear nerf and makes this gun slightly viable for boss damage in some scenarios. In these instances, the roll to get would be arrowhead break for 100 recoil direction, enhanced battery for a longer 1 mag shooting time, reconstruction or rewind rounds, surrounded, and a charge time masterwork. Fixed rolls. The exotic weapons used for boss damage are the same as the ones used for Major Burst, with Grand Overture and the Warcliffe Coil tossed into the mix and Xenophage taken out. Moving on to champion stuns. Artifact stun weapons. The seasonal artifact determines which weapons can stun which champions each season through mods, so this category encompasses all of them. Be aware that some primary stun mods are preferred over others though. Overload Bow over Auto is a great example. On top of this, some perks can greatly impact the difficulty a primary has stunning a champion. Since subclass buffs like Radiant now grant champion stun effects and different weapons are available every season, I'll go over the best stun options that are preferred for each champion type. For barrier champions, Scout and Sniper are generally seen as the best mods, with options like Auto, SMG, and Sidearm being decent alternatives. With Radiant active, Adaptive Munitions Trace Rifles also scale incredibly quickly against barrier champions, with the perk also massively increasing the effectiveness of primaries with the mod active. Of course, Arbalest and Wishender are staple picks that are also considered when another higher priority exotic isn't occupying an endgame loadout. For Overload champions, Bow, Hand Cannon, and Trace are seen as the best mods, with Sword and SMG as middling options. When it comes to stunning, Explosive and Timed Payload both count as 2 shots for the mod activation requirement, reducing the time to stun from 3 to 2 shots for a Hand Cannon, for example. Exotic-wise, Divinity and Tractor Cannon are both great options for both debuffing and stunning overloads, with Le Monarch being a decent option for solo-oriented content. For unstoppable champions, almost anything passes, with a preference for Shotgun, Glaive, and GL, since they have no ADS time requirement. There aren't really any perks that affect stun difficulty for unstoppable champions, but there are 2 exotics that are frequently used to stun them in higher difficulty content, Bastion and Leviathan's Breath. Chill Clip weapons. Chill Clip is unique because it has the potential to apply both slow and shatter on its own with no champion mods involved. For the first time, a perk that requires nothing but a half-full mag can allow any weapon to stun champions, regardless of seasonal mods. For this reason, Chill Clip gets its own category, separate from perks like Adaptive Munitions and Explosive Payload, which help with stunning but do not stun on their own. For now, the clear endgame player favorite out of all the Chill Clip options is Riptide, and for good reason. With access to autoloading holster and field prep, along with being a decently fast application of the perk as a rapid fire fusion, it's obvious why so many players choose to take it for managing overload and unstoppable champions. Since the goal is stunning as quickly as possible, the target roll should be Arrowhead Break to improve recoil direction, Accelerated Coils, autoloading holster to bypass needing to reload, or field prep to improve reserves and reload, and of course, Chill Clip and a charge time masterwork. An honorable mention goes to Lingering Dread, which can perform Chill Clip stuns while also blinding enemies through disorienting grenades, an even more versatile option, though it's less accessible for farming. Finally, let's talk utility. Blinding or disorienting grenade launchers. Disorienting grenades is one of the most broken perks in the game, and it's not even a standard 2-column perk, it's a projectile option. With the ability to completely disable anything but boss or champion level enemies at the cost of 1 ammo, this perk becomes especially useful in content where enemies pose a real threat to players. Let's talk about the kinetic slot, since that tends to be the more important of the two when talking about disorienting grenades. The 3 contenders are Ignition Code, Pardon Our Dust, and the Malicious Birthright. All 3 have their own merits, with Ignition offering Slide Shot, Pardon offering enhanced autoloading, and Malicious offering Lead from Gold. Regardless of what option you take, they'll do similar jobs, and you'll still want Quick Launch for handling, disorienting grenades obviously, a reload assistance perk like autoloading holster or a slide shot, and then a utility perk of your choice, along with a handling masterwork. Eager Edge Swords. Movement is key to a lot of endgame content, and you'd be remiss to leave home without an Eager Edge Sword as an endgame Destiny 2 player if you're keen on doing anything quickly. Eager Edge sword rolls were already discussed in the Major Burst section, so the only thing I'll mention here is the possibility of crafting an Eager Edge sword with Jagged Edge in order to maximize hitting a one-shot damage threshold in an encounter where you don't need to worry about running out of sword ammo, but you still need the movement bonus. Miscellaneous weapons. This is a huge category that blankets anything that is not centered around damage, uptime, or stunning champions, but is still a useful role for a weapon to fill. Examples include shoot-to-loot weapons, volt shot application, and weapons needed to shoot objects or complete objectives. Resources. Hopefully, this video has left you with enough basic knowledge to understand why a weapon might be a Godroll. In case you need more information about the finer details of weapon perks, archetypes, champion stunning, and whatever else suits your fancy, I'll list out a couple community source documents and databases that are excellent for looking up whatever information you need on weapons. d2foundry.gg. D2 Foundry, the spiritual successor to D2 Gunsmith, is an excellent tool for looking up any weapon in Destiny 2 and seeing all of its perks at a glance. With updated perk descriptions with community-backed testing, Foundry is the easiest way to quickly check what a weapon can roll with to see if it's worth farming. The Destiny Data Compendium. The Destiny Data Compendium is quite possibly the most comprehensive database of information that Bungie doesn't publish about its game. Anything about numbers, damage buffs, exotic perks, ability cooldowns, raid mods, you'll find it all here. If you've seen a website with a more detailed perk description than what is written in-game, the chances are that information was sourced directly from the compendium. Court Stacking and Combatants Guide. The Stacking and Combatants Guide is another great spreadsheet resource that contains detailed information about damage classifications along with buffs, debuffs, and stuns. If you're ever unsure about how something will stack or stun, be sure to check this resource out. The D2 Damage Generator. The D2 Damage Generator is another phenomenal spreadsheet that anyone can use to calculate single weapon damage for nearly every relevant option in the game. If you've ever wondered how a weapon sizes up when it comes to boss DPS, this is the spreadsheet to go to. Even if you're just curious, make a copy and play around with it yourself. You might be surprised about some of its results. The Destiny Speedrunner Shopping List. Finally, the Destiny Speedrunner Shopping List is a spreadsheet that I maintain, with the weapons most important to speedrunning Destiny kept with specific role information and run usage on the list. While speedrunning isn't everyone's cup of tea, I've taken into account every speedrun activity, including GMs, raids, dungeons, and the like. As a result, even if you aren't looking to speedrun, you're sure to find a weapon that experienced players have deemed effective for an endgame activity. After spending a lot of time answering people's questions about roles in a variety of Destiny 2 communities, I came to the realization that pretty much every question people ask has a few things in common. First, people usually only ask questions about whether or not their roles are good in endgame content. Since in other content, they can just use whatever they want. You don't need someone else to tell you what guns sound nice and feel good. Second, people usually ask the same questions about the same guns all the time. Whenever a new Nightfall weapon enters the rotation, there's an influx of people that ask whether or not their role of that weapon is good. Third, usually people will be repeat customers, so to speak. Since they don't understand why a gun is an endgame Godroll, they come back time and time again asking about more guns without actually learning anything. This video aims to address all three of these things. By helping players understand a three-stage approach to analyzing Godrolls, in the future they can make their own decisions about why a weapon is an optimal choice in an endgame scenario. Need to know what's the best DPS shotgun? Now there's a process you can take to understand why a certain shotgun is the best option on your own terms. If you have any new friends that understand the basics of the game but want to take the first step in creating their own endgame loadouts, this video aims to be the perfect place to start. Things may change from season to season, but the idea is that any player at any time can understand why a weapon is or isn't an endgame Godroll using this guide. As usual, if you have any questions about what I posted in this video, feel free to leave a comment or send me a DM on Discord at Aegis8622. Thanks for sticking it out with me.